We're going to go over several of the details that we saw in the last video during the live lab because I really want to drive home these troubleshooting tips with you. They're very important because as we've seen, router on a stick can literally just take you minutes to set up. But there are quite a few details we got to watch, quite a few places where things can go wrong. The router, first off, we know the port has to be fast Ethernet at minimum. Now, you can create sub-interfaces on an Ethernet interface. That's not the problem. But then when you try to run the encapsulation command, it's going to say unrecognized command. Sub-interfaces have to go on the router interface. We know that. Now, the trunking protocol configured on the router sub-interfaces, certainly it has to match those of the trunk port connected to the router. The IP address configured on a sub-interface has to be part of the subnet used by the VLAN that we indicated in the encap command. A couple of things to look out for on the switch. Of course, if the switch port connected to the router isn't trunking, then we're in a lot of trouble. And of course, we want to go ahead and set that trunking to on unconditionally. We don't want to negotiate anything. The trunking port in use, whether it be ISL or .1Q, has to match the one in use on the router sub-interfaces, and the ports leading to the host need to be access ports. As far as the hosts go, each host has to have its default gateway set to the IP address of the router subinterface that is part of the VLAN's address space. And you may be thinking the whole time, hey, this is all just a blinding glimpse of the obvious. We know this stuff, we just saw it. That's the beauty of router on a stick. These are really the things that go wrong with it. And if they're that obvious and that simple, we're going to nail them and then move on to the next thing. A couple of frequently screwed up configs, though, I want to show you. And actually, I'm going to show you one diagram right now, or one network. What's wrong with this network? And if you need to pause the video for a minute and think about it, that's fine. But this one is kind of screaming at you. I'm not doing anything tricky here. And the problem here is on your hosts. Note that the IP address assigned to the host and the default gateway, the DG value, they're in separate address spaces. Anytime you see that, huge red flag. I mean, a red flag should literally come up from the back of the screen when you're taking the exam if you see that. The reason I want to show you this, if your eyes went to the router first, that's perfectly fine. But what I've noticed over the years of teaching router on a stick is that when something goes wrong with the config, you know what people always tend to do? They go straight to the router. And even if things look fine there, they'll just keep on looking at the router. Well, things can go wrong on the switch. We could forget to make trunking, on. We could not run show interface trunk. We might not have run show VLAN brief to make sure the VLAN assignments are correct. So that's really my point here. I know this default gateway deal is obvious, but I just want it to serve as a reminder that when you're troubleshooting a router on a stick, don't just look at the router. Look at what's on the other end of the stick, so to speak, if you will. Now, what's wrong with this setup? See anything wrong? I'm going to scroll down because I want to show you the config. It says R1 config, should say R6. I'll fix that. But as far as our router config goes on the end of router on a stick, what's the deal here? Well, an IP address from VLAN 2 subnet has been applied to the sub interface with the VLAN 4 ID. See that? We've got ISL 4, but the address that we have on here is from VLAN 2. And then on our other sub interface, what do we got? We've got ISL 2, but we have an address from VLAN 4's routing space. So that's what the kind of thing you really got to watch. Again, nothing complex here at all. The only thing is you just got to watch the details we've looked at here and that we've talked about with the hosts and the switch and the router, not just the router. This concludes our look and our lab with router on a stick. And coming up next, we're going to get started with some layer 3 switching, and then we'll take it from there. So I'll see you in the next video, and we'll take a look at a layer 3 switch.